love interviewing other podcasters too, because it's like we have no idea where this next hour is going to take us. And
anywhere. Hour if we're lucky, I reckon.
But welcome, Laura. I am so glad we finally could meet, and I've been looking forward to interviewing you for ages, basically since I discovered your awesome podcast. How long has it been now? Has it been 2 years yet?
It will be 2 years at the beginning of May. Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to be on. Your podcast is amazing, so I'm super grateful to be on. Thank you.
You are just, a whirlwind. It's so amazing. And I've loved watching you and Dawn as you started this journey. And then that moment of the transition when Dawn had to make this decision. It's like, I feel like you're kind of the soap opera that we've
I know.
following.
I know.
And
that's why I started doing the little tidbits, because I was like, can we just give people some information? Because there's much bigger things going on than our lives. So let's actually talk about ADHD and never mind us for a second.
No, but I think it's a testament. I mean, as weird as it must be to have so many people kind of invested in your life online, it must be, I mean, it's a testament, I think, to not only ADHD, but just the power of your vulnerability in this podcast and in this sphere, and how, I just think you've talked about this so much on your podcast, this how a diagnosis can be so transformative in terms of how we view our capabilities and our, limitlessness a lot of the time. And while, the term superpower is so problematic, I just feel like I just love when a diagnosis feels, so clearly is like this blooming of our true essence. And I feel like you are that personified.
Yeah.
So
that's so lovely. I think it's definitely like, I see it as a very interesting, it's not just a plot twist or a second act or a new chapter. It really does feel like a new life, like literally, trigger warning, not to be bleak on a Friday, but it's like, I always say that ADHD diagnosis not only changed, but actually saved my life. I am lucky to be here. And I do feel like with the treatment that I've used and managing my symptoms and getting to grips with all of this and really, finding out that I wasn't alone in my struggles has completely changed my life. I've got a new one, really. Mm-hmm. And that's really why I do what I do, because I want that for everybody. I want everybody to have that opportunity,
Mm-hmm. I know, right? I feel the same way. I feel like, because I joke about the fact that nobody ever gets diagnosed with ADHD because they're like, my life is going great. What is the name for this wonderful superpower? Right? Like most of us are in the shit, right? Like we've hit rock bottom. And that's why this feels like such an opportunity to rebuild. And I used to say, like, when I first got my diagnosis, I felt like a fucking phoenix, I was just like, it was, and then I got burnt out and had to, I was like, we'll get to that later.
Lit onto your ass, phoenix rising from the ashes and then bursting into flames and chaos.
Right. Okay, so let's backtrack a little bit, because I do want to hear about what was happening in your life. I know you've shared this story many times, but for the sake of my listeners, what was happening in your own life that you started to put two and two together and think this could be ADHD?
Well, truthfully, my life has always just been so chaotic, so extreme. And it's like I've constantly tripped up every step of the way. I've always felt very outside of everything. So like a really good example, I mean, the American and English office is a bit different, but you've got Jim and we've got Tim. But Tim from the office is always looking for the camera. It's almost like the candid camera of like, can you hear this? Like, is this really happening? Is everyone else all right with this? Because I don't really get this. That's how it's felt. I'm literally going, why is everyone so weird? But they're not weird because they're all in it together. I'm weird. Like, what is happening here? And things just got worse and worse and worse. Like it would always be sort of one step forward, two steps back. So there would be relationship issues, financial issues, employment. From my teenage years, I accumulated really horrendous eating disorder. depression, all the rest of it. And I kept every step of the way trying to get better, trying to get help. I went to the doctors many times. I've had hypnotherapy, psychotherapy, all of the things, tried absolutely everything short of ayahuasca, but I was very tempted at one point, and literally nothing made it better. And then things got worse. And when I started this podcast, I started by saying that I felt that I had a nervous breakdown at 35. And what I can now identify is that was extreme burnout. And I interviewed a wonderful doctor on ADHDAF called Dr. Nigar Arif. And she talked about, and of course I've forgotten what it's called, but the research, multi-hormone something, therapy, something. So basically that our ADHD symptoms are exacerbated in the different stages of our lives due to our hormonal fluctuations. So that's throughout the month, but then also in those big moments like perimenopause, etc. And I realized that I started going into perimenopause early, and that was when I fell down. I fell down hard, and I basically couldn't get back up. But just before I fell, I had a conversation with a friend who told me that they had just been diagnosed with ADHD. And to my mind, as I looked at this person who I've always held on a pedestal, successful, happy, I was like, well, you're not a hyperactive little boy in a classroom. You can't have ADHD, the same stereotype that everybody has, right? She's like, I said, so explain it to me. How could you possibly have it? What does this look like for you? And she told me what she was experiencing, talked about the different symptoms. And I literally said, oh, Christ, well, if you've got it, I've definitely got it. And then she was like, yes, Laura. Yes, I think so. That's
this
why
is
we're
an
talking
intervention.
about it. Yeah. But even at that point, I didn't tie together the anxiety, the depression, the eating disorder, and this thing. I saw them as separate things. So even though I could see that I struggled with a lot of the things that are the symptoms, I still took the weight of the shame of it, all of that stuff, thinking, yeah, but I know it looks like I've got this thing, but I'm still really rubbish. And then this other stuff is separate to that. I never kind of put it together as a package because I didn't do the education. And obviously there wasn't as much information online about the condition as there is now. And then I feel like I've been talking for 50,000 years. Should I carry on? Have I answered the question? Anyway, in the end, as it says in the podcast, I basically moved to Scotland. I was incredibly depressed. It was during the pandemic. I joke that I sat down on the sofa and I didn't get back up for 2 years. And that is basically the truth. I was not myself at all. And I didn't want to be here anymore. And I met a neighbour, Dawn. We moved to the same street at the same time, etc. And it was the first time we were allowed to socialise outdoors from the pandemic. And I had a barbecue, and she said to me, I'm sorry if I talk too much. I think I have ADHD. And I said, no way, me too. And I'd already, at that point, before moving to Scotland, sorry, it's a bit side questy, I'd put myself down on a waiting list for the NHS, the National Healthcare System in England, which is so broken because it's underfunded. And basically that I never came up with anything from that list. I didn't understand that diagnosing ADHD was any different to diagnosing any condition. You know, if you've got to think, I've been to doctor's appointments all my life for depression, anxiety, eating disorders, and they go, tick, 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 pot of pills. I thought it was going to be the same thing. I had no idea what lay ahead of me. So there I was on this waiting list, nearly, you know, wasn't here anymore. And then when Dawn said that she was going to go for diagnosis, my husband pointed out that this new job that we'd moved to Scotland for gave me access to private healthcare, which is something that I never would have had the money to do. I never, as I say, this is one of the ways that ADHD has tripped me up, is that I struggled in employment and with finances. So I never would have had access to private healthcare. So it's not just a privilege, it's a fluke. Anyway, from that point, as she was going for it, I was like, well, I'll look into it then. And because it's that privilege, I only had to wait 4 months from that point and got diagnosed with severe combined type ADHD at the age of 38. And I'll come up for air now, sorry.
And it's so incredible. It's such an amazing story. And also I feel like I, you know, I love talking to guests in the UK and sort of thinking about the comparison between how ADHD is treated in the US versus the UK and even Australia, because it's so different and it's so amazing. And I'm like, why is it? Do you think? Okay, first of all, let me even like figure out what I want to ask. So I feel like there's so much more like gaslighting about ADHD in the UK, especially in the UK media, than I think there is in the US. And it's coming. I mean, there has been some like, oh, everybody has it, it's a trend. But like, what do you think is behind that? Is it, because I feel like it could be anything from imperialism to the NHS and having a completely overwhelmed system right now, and so the I guess the reaction to a 7-year wait list is to blame the patients. But like, what do you think's happening? Why do you think the UK in particular is so fucking like dismissive of
Can I just say, I'm really relieved that you just swore.
oh yeah.
That takes the pressure off.
I know. I'm like, people are like, can I swear on this podcast? I'm like, I don't know. Have you heard this podcast? Yeah. No, I'm like, why is it? Because basically this is I want to ask you more about activism because of, how I feel like you and Don also both really quickly turned to very vocal activism. And I think a lot of us do when it's just like, for a lot of reasons, there's the whole, justice sensitivity that with ADHD. And just like you said, like wanting to save other people from feeling so shitty about themselves. But I do feel like over the years, as I've been watching this this rise of ADHD awareness and diagnoses hand in hand, it feels like the UK in particular is really really there's such a backlash.
Really far behind.
Yeah, well, it's just like an really angry backlash, and I feel like there's such what's the word I'm even looking for? I don't know if it's gaslighting or just like it's so I don't know, rude. It's just it feels like it's so dismissed. It's vicious. And it's like what's the word I'm looking for? Where it's like you're just insulting.
And dangerous.
Yeah.
Dangerous. I think the thing is there's so many things at once, right? There are so many different things at once. So what we are in right now is a monumental moment of mass awareness. Right now, everything has happened at once. It's like this kind of pressure cooker. I don't, for a person who struggles conceptually with some things, I do not understand how anybody can look at what is quite clearly a really clear line of events that have got us here and see it as anything other than it is. This is plain as day to me, right? What you've got is the healthcare system in the UK has been underfunded. It's on its knees, right? It's on its knees. The greedy governments have broken it intentionally. At the same time, so how the system works at this moment in time is that the GP is the gatekeeper to diagnosis, right? But unfortunately, due to underfunding, etc., the average GP in the UK only has 1 hour of very basic training, which is based on outdated and gender biased research, right? So what you've got, this stereotype, my dear naughty little boys in the classroom, that's literally the very basic training that they have. And that just is what it is. But the issue is that they then sit as the gatekeeper to diagnosis. So literally what you're saying is, in order to be able to be assessed, to speak to somebody who knows what they're talking about, you have to convince somebody who literally doesn't know what they're talking about. And that's not a diss to GPs. Everyone is doing their best, especially the NHS. It's not their fault that they're not trained and there isn't the funding to train them. Everyone is doing their best. But it really doesn't make any sense whatsoever, because what you're doing is you've got, as you rightly said, you've got people that are broken, who's the wrecking ball of ADHD and unidentified ADHD has come in and smashed their life to bits. The 20,000 negative things before the age of 10, sitting on our shoulders, steeped in that shame. We have to go and fight with somebody to tell them that we have something, which our imposter syndrome is telling us that we don't even have, because actually we're just really shit and useless, and that all of that negative stuff that we're holding on to. Speak to somebody who's going to turn around and say to you, well, you can't have ADHD because you have a job, because you're married, because you went to university, because you've never been arrested, right? Because you're not a child, because you don't, because you're not male. Like any of these things that these GPs are spouting, that I hear day in and day out from people in my community. It's horrendous. But so you've got that on the one hand. Then on the other hand, what you've got is that ADHD, however, right, let me backtrack a second. So language is powerful, but it's also personal, right? So a lot of people don't like to think of ADHD as a disability or a disorder. And I understand that, and I respect that. And we all have to have respect that we can speak about our own experiences in the language that best suits us, right? But ADHD is a registered disability in the UK under the Equality Act 2010. Okay. Now, if the mainstream media in the UK knew that, there is no way in hell they would attack a group of disabled people. And this is the problem. They don't have the awareness. They don't understand that it's a disability. And in being what is classed, language aside, but legally classed as a disabled group of people, it means that we are a protected group of people. And that means it is effectively illegal to attack and abuse. Well, it's illegal to attack and abuse anybody, but it's, what is the word I'm looking for? The only word I can think of is bully, but be accusationary, be dismissive, be awful to a person based on the symptoms of their disability. So when you're saying, like, don't be lazy, don't do this, just do that, but it's literally illegal what's happening in the press. And the only reason why it's happening is because people don't know. And it goes across the board. And with regards to the label, the trend, etc., as I said, it makes perfect sense to me. You have these GPs here, none of us know, society isn't aware, the GPs don't even know, and all of a sudden we're all locked in our houses, away from our coping strategies, away from our jobs, careers, whatever. Children don't have to go to school, all of the rest of it, and we're sat here going, well, why can't I wash my hair? And why can't I find the spoons to make the dinner? Quite literally. And all the rest of it, right? We're all here going, because we're faced with it. All of our coping strategies, all of our lives, all of the essential deadlines of everything just taken away. And at exactly the same time, you've got TikTok and podcast culture boom, right? Where they'll let any old tart like me tell you their life story, and it gets broadcast all over the world, and we're all talking to each other. And this is happening whilst we're sat at home. With nothing to do and nowhere to be, wondering what the hell's wrong with us. All of the information is going round and round and round. It makes sense. It all makes sense. It's not a trend. We didn't know. Now we know, and we can communicate it. That's it. The end. I cracked the case. Somebody give me a medal. Do you know what I mean? It's ridiculous.
I know it's been quite a few years. And, that was me. I was absolutely at a pandemic diagnosis at 45. And, people always talk about, everybody thinks they have ADHD on TikTok. I'm like, of course, everybody on TikTok has ADHD. We're moths to a flame. It's like crack cocaine, that app. So of course we all have ADHD.
And engineered that way. Yeah.
God. Okay. So, right. It's, yeah. That was a mouthful. I'm just going to sit with
and
Go ahead.
Sorry, I just talk a lot. Hyperverbality is my...
I think you really articulated how complex and complicated the last couple of years have been with this surge in diagnoses. Yeah. But I think it's, because I have ADHD and I'm used to being gaslit my whole life, I'm always asking that question of like, well, wait a minute, did we get this wrong? Is there something else happening? Is this the trauma of the pandemic that we're all sort of having ADHD like symptoms and and this is all, you know, and that's why I think when we talk about how this has shown up in our lives over the years and masking, and that this is something that has happened, you know, that this isn't just something that came about in the last couple of years for us.
No, absolutely. And as you were saying about the kind of activism side of it, like for me, that is quite literally what I came here to do. So Dawn and I, like, as you pointed out, like the podcast started as a duo and now it's just me solo. And that's because despite spending every second of every day with each other and living in each other's pockets, sometimes us ADHDers are not the best communicators. And so I came in, I bulldozed in with a plan of like, this is what I want to do, and didn't quite realise, communicate, or possibly even hear that wasn't exactly what Dawn was there to do as well. And she came to raise awareness, and she wanted to share her story and help people through her own experiences. But the next line, which was my bit, was kind of the bit that we didn't share. And activism isn't even though what we were doing was activism in action, it wasn't really what Dawn came in to do. And we just had to run so fast that we miscommunicated, we misunderstood, and the rules and the boundaries, and it all just got really, really confused. So, you know, what Dawn has done has been an enormous help to so many people. And I'm here to fuck shit up, basically. I came here with a plan, an actual plan. I read a book called How to Be an Activist by Amika George, and she spells out what you do. You literally go, right, I came in with an idea. I'd solved it. I knew how to fix the diagnosis crisis, right? And of course I didn't. There were loads and loads of holes in my plan. And that's what the book says, is like, you're going to have an idea, but you're only looking at it one way. And you don't understand the complexities of all the different parts of the problem. So what you need to do is speak to a load of people. So you rally the troops, you get everybody in, and you listen to every which side of the argument. That's why I asked the question in the podcast, what would you do? What would you do to change the system? What would you do? I'm literally researching. And then as you're doing that, you rally up all the troops behind you, and you make all these connections, and you find out from every which way. And when you've got it solid, you stick your campaign out, and everyone's there to sign it, and everyone's in agreement, and all the holes are filled. I literally came in with a strategic plan, which I did convey, but apparently didn't convey it clearly enough. And we were, ironically, when you look at the logo of ADHDAF, we are literally looking in different directions. I designed it. Didn't even see it. Clear as day. We are looking in different directions.
Well, hindsight is 2020.
We've done a lot of good, and we had a lot of fun.
Well, I mean, you know, I felt very emotional when Dawn just made her decision. I think it was one of the bravest things I've seen in the ADHD sphere, because I often say the hardest thing about ADHD is saying no to ourselves, right? Saying no to our own desire to do all the things all at once. And so, you know, and I also you've also talked about the golden ticket, right? Which is, I felt that way with this podcast. Like, I didn't know what I was doing. I leap first and think later. And so I didn't know if this was going to be a 1 week thing or what, you know? And so there's a lot of that, like, there's a lot where you can't even predict. And so I don't imagine that you had any idea how huge the podcast was going to be or how big the platform was going to be. Like, there's just too many variables that are unknown in the beginning, where you're like, I don't know, I'm just doing this thing for fun. And then next thing you know, people are writing you from around the world, and you're like, what's happening? And so that momentum is amazing. But I think there's also, like, you know, when she said, you know, It's Darkest Before the Dawn episode, when she was talking about how, like, I suddenly realized I was being shit at everything. And I, like, felt that to my core, because I'm the same way, where I'm like, I've taken on too much. I have to figure out how to pull back. I take on too much. I have to figure out how to pull back. Like, that's the ADHD dilemma, is that, like, always at the edge of burnout, always needing to kind of operate on this higher frequency in order to keep ourselves stimulated and motivated and excited about things, but at the same time, taking on so much that I end up burnt out, and I end up, like, overwhelmed, and I end up dropping the ball and doing all these things. And the fact that I think that she was like, no, I'm in school, and this is something I need to do right now, I thought was, like, God, that is ADHD awareness and a diagnosis in action, because that is being able to reframe that as like a responsible decision with a plan, as opposed to I'm shit and I just dropped one more thing that I could have been successful at, right? Like I felt like it was the most adult mature thing, and I was like really inspired by it, because I was at this point in my career where I was like, oh god, I don't want to give up the podcast, but I'm in school right now and I want to do this thing and I have this long-term plan to become, like I'm in school right now to become an ADHD therapist, but I also knew that that was going to be 2 or 3 years of my life that I had to pull back from other stuff. And it's been horrible. Like it's horrible to have to pull back from things when you're not ready. And so I think it was tremendous that she made that decision. I love the fact that you moved forward too and kept up with it, and also you weren't like, oh, I can't do this by myself, right? Like that you are a phoenix in a lot of ways.
It's like you said, we did. Oh, thank you. We didn't, we didn't know how far it was going to go and how quickly it was going to go and how far it was going to spread. But I absolutely did not come in here for fun. I came in here with a plan. And truthfully, had the podcast have not taken off, I would have found another means to move forward with my plan. I came in here as an activist. It is my life's mission to help even a tiny bit in the push for change.
Well, and you've amassed your leopard print army, and so congratulations on the announcement this week of the ADHDAF Plus charity. So where is that? Okay, so what is the future of the charity, and kind of what do you envision the charity being?
So, as it stands, so since the episode went out, we since passed the initial screening. So that's apparently the hardest part. So that's very, very exciting. So we've applied to be a charity in England, Scotland and Wales. And we are a charity for ADHD adults of marginalised genders to unite and empower through peer support and education. Now, pardon me, what that looks like, I can't at this point give the finer details, but I've got an amazing board of trustees, and it's such a funny thing because I know that we can't go wrong. It's the weirdest thing, because I've done a lot of like radio and different interviews lately, and it feels so different because I don't care. Like I can say what I need to say and there aren't any big repercussions. And now I've got these wonderful people behind me believing in me and trusting me to not say the wrong thing. And I'm just there like, oh, suddenly there's this pressure. But I know that we can do a lot of good work. And it's really like everything from the charity has been informed by my experiences of doing this podcast. So through the podcast, we created a community called Planet ADHDAF. And within that is like the peer support, not guidelines, what's the word I'm looking for? Like, that's what I've seen is how we support each other and where we fall down, and through the live events that I'm doing. So I'm about to do the third and final tour in the UK. And like, it's in seeing the live event, in seeing that people were coming on their own or feeling like they're on their own, in seeing how much people benefit from not just online but in-person peer support. There's so many topics that come up time and time again, from personal relationships to family struggles to managing the household to in the world of work, telling their employer, all of this stuff. The amount of us that are brilliant at or have entrepreneurial leanings or brilliant ideas and things, and then we're stifled by systems. How do we apply for things? Do you know what I mean? All of this stuff that I've just watched play out time and time and time again. Now as a charity, I know that I can do really good work there, because it's not just like me coming to a city and playing ADHDAF bingo. As much as that is incredibly fun and incredibly useful, it means that as a charity with proper funding, it means that I can get proper expertise to come to leave something behind in local communities. So rather than like running around the country, I can go to one city for a number of days and actually leave something solid behind and support local communities that way. And I'm so excited.
Yeah, I remember there was one interview you did where you were talking about the expat community when you were in, was it Thailand? Oh, no, but you
both.
But you were talking about the expat community and how helpful everybody was, right? And how there was always like a ride somewhere, or so, you know, if you needed to fill something out, there was always, and it felt like the perfect sort of small microcosm community for ADHD. And, you know, I feel like we do, like, we need, like, where did we lose that, you know? And because you said when you returned to London, it would just, you felt so alone, you felt so isolated. I'm like, how do we create those communities? Because I feel like you know, the online communities do amazing things, but I feel like there's something about like that. Yeah, it's almost like we need to start creating communes or something. Like, you know, and
oh, I'm 100% up for it. Sign me up.
Right? Well, at Kathleen Nadeau, when I was interviewing her recently about, she was talking about, you know, aging and ADHD. And she was talking about how like retirement communities are not financially accessible to a lot of people with ADHD because we're shit with money. And so she was talking about like getting roommates and sort of bringing back this idea of like not being alone, having support, creating chosen family. And part of, you know, the introvert of me was like, I don't know if I'm going to share my kitchen again, but also being like, it's so true. Like, I think all we need is just a few, we need that communal element and 100%. Right. And how did we?
Community is everything. It is everything. And for me, like, that's part of why I've always ended up working in pubs, for example. But actually, like, the downside to that is alcohol. So not so good. But it was that community that drew me to it, you know. You know the plumber, you know the butcher, you know the baker, you know everybody. And we're all like, oh, you need something? Oh, they're the person to ask. Is that idea of community. I've always been drawn to it. We are stronger together. And for anybody to just feel that they're not alone, that is everything. Because especially for those of us that do live in our own heads so much, it can be such a lonely place, and we need to know that we're not alone in it. So yeah, community, peer support, it's absolutely everything.
Oh, yeah. So, okay, well, that's fantastic. So this is the last tour. I want to make sure we can promote it or, you know, people can find out the dates and everything on, is it still ADHDasfemales.com? Are you changing the website?
Yeah, so it's ADHDasfemales.com at the moment. The Instagram is ADHDAF podcast, and yeah, it's very exciting. It's called Alien Nation because it explores the different ways in which I personally felt alienated by society, but these are the themes, as I said, that I've witnessed throughout the community of ways in which we feel alienated. And within that, it will be the same concept of the previous tours where I play bingo, because it's basically where a seminar meets bingo, because it helps with that reward system. And that's the thing is, I just want to say, like, as I've said, ADHD presents differently in every single person. But if ADHD presents in people the way it presents in me, then it means that, like, I might get bored. So I'd rather play a game and I might win a prize. And, you know, it's just a really fun way of doing it. But within it, I'm also, you know, have some actually useful people, not just telling jokes and being silly, but, you know, talking about how we can do better on both sides of the coin. So, for example, in education, at my Birmingham show, I have a group of teachers there who've got a podcast called The Teacher Experience. And they're talking about, like, not only how teachers can better support children or spot it or support the neurodivergent kids in their classrooms, but also teachers that are discovering their own neurodiversity later in life. How do they get support and things like that? So it's like I said, it's about connection, validation, like humor, but useful information as well. It's just done in my own weird and wonderful way, because that's what I've learned. And I think it has to represent that as a whole, is how do we get things done? How do we get things done? We get them done together, and we get them done our way. You have to support yourself in it. And so I know how to throw a party, and I know how to organise silly events and make things fun. So that's how I've delivered however many seminars it is now, is in leopard print with a ladle in my hand, pulling bingo balls and telling jokes, basically. But this is the last hurrah, because there's no more nonsense. I'm getting serious and starting the charity and being a bit more
So you're
useful.
you're not necessarily not touring anymore. It's just, it will look a little different. Is that true?
Well, it will look very different, very, very different. So there'll never be these kind of one-off events like this that are parties. There'll be different things. Like, I will go to cities, but it'll be more tangible work with more left behind, if that makes sense.
Yeah. I mean, in the US, there's the they call it the International ADHD Conference, but I think it's only because there's like a couple Canadians who show up. But I'm like, is there something similar in the UK or Europe, like an annual conference? Or
there's lots of different things. There's lots of different things that are on. And, a lot of the different charities in the UK, they will put on different conferences at different times of the year. But I think really for me, the main focus is on the experience of the people, rather than the expertise of this is how you do X, Y, and Z. It's actually sort of flipping it around experientially and learning from that and finding ways to support ourselves with that, rather than this is the textbook of what we do and how we do it. See what I mean?
Yeah, no, it is. It's like the seminar versus the rave. It's like the
the alien leopard print rave. Yeah, absolutely.
I think there's validity in both, right? Like, because like you said, I think, really, well, you can tell who are the people who come to the conference for the information and who have their pens and paper. And then there's the people who only come for the talent show and the parties and just seeing each other, right? Like, it's, seeing everybody every year, and it's such a wonderful social gathering.
I also think there can be, in this country anyway, there can be an awful lot of corporate box ticking too, right?
Yeah.
So, it's, just want to make sure that things have value and that the help and support that's left behind, and that people genuinely feel supported rather than necessarily ticking their box, if that makes sense.
And what about the podcast? Are you taking applications for another co-host? Are you going to bring in some? I know your husband has been doing some work with you.
No.
Are you? What do you think of? What do you think of the next year or two?
He only comes on for the most ADHD thing. So the most ADHD thing is just about trying to take the stigma out of the symptoms and the ridiculousness that we all throw ourselves, or the ridiculous situations we can often find ourselves in. And I do it to raise awareness, to make people feel that they're not alone, and so that we can talk to each other about it and be like, oh my God, I've had people say to me, I did something so ridiculous and normally I would have cried, but instead I thought, this is the most ADHD thing I've done this week, and I'm going to go and write it on ADHDAF podcast page. And that makes me so happy. And it means that people can talk to each other and support each other on Instagram. But he's been helping me with that. But really, no, I will never have another co-host. I think it was so serendipitous, our meeting. It was meant to happen. And I've learned a lot from it. And I really have to focus on myself. And I think so often I will always focus on the other person, and that people pleaser element is still there. I always feel responsible for people, and we can all do that thing where we think we're all right until we're not. So you can just give and 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 give, and then suddenly you're left with sweet fuck all. And so I think it's really important that I try and put my energy into myself to best support myself to do my job. Yeah. If that makes sense. And if I have a co-host, then I'm going to constantly worry if they're all right. I'm going to try and help them as best I can. I'm going to pick up the slack. I'm going to put their needs before my own. I'm going to let, that will happen till the cows come home. And I work too hard for that, and I've got too clear a vision for that. I better just crack on and ask for support where I need it. is the best thing to do. But I have got regular people that come back, have really built a good community. I have a lot of support. And season 3, well, this is the funniest thing. This is the most ADHD thing I've done this week, right? So I've said that season 3 is going to come out on the 9th of April. However, I haven't finished the jingle, and the person who's done the jingle is on holiday, I think, or has ghosted me because I'm a massive pain in the arse and keep changing my mind. So I have no jingle. I don't know, I literally don't know how I'm going to do it. And I'm like, well, maybe I should take another week and just give myself a break and get all my ducks in a row properly and give it another week. And then the other part of me is like, no, you should definitely just so I don't know. I've either got season 3 out on Tuesday or I haven't, but I've got really good guests and it's going to be
I definitely know that feeling. And well, this episode will come out after the 9th, so we'll see. We'll have to see what happens.
We'll see what happens. It's fine.
Oh, I love that. And I think that also just knowing yourself in that way, I think is also similar to kind of the decision that Dawn made. Such a benefit of the ADHD reframing, right? And being able to sort of see this is where I work best, and not saying I'm terrible because I can't do X, but really saying, no, that just doesn't work for me. Move on, right? Wasting no time feeling bad. And when you were talking about the people pleasing, it reminded me of that quote of the irony of people pleasing is that usually everybody ends up unhappy in the end. And
exactly. Exactly. And I think the other thing is I saw a really good quote the other day, and it was know your limits because the takers don't have any. And that's the issue, isn't it? It's if you keep giving and you keep giving and you keep doing and you keep providing. I mean, that phrase is particularly negative and it doesn't sit in this context, but I'm going to have to think of a new one. But it's you're not showing anybody that you need help. You're not showing anybody that you're struggling. You're showing everybody that you can take whatever they throw at you, that there's nothing that can knock you down and it's always going to be all right. You're always going to hold it. It's always going to, and actually you end up just completely run down, unable to do anything, and quite hurt, quite resentful, and feeling taken advantage of, even though you're the person who's been there saying, no problem, absolutely, keep it coming. You're not actually communicating that you're not all right, and it's well, ironically, too much.
Yeah. Well, it reminds me, one of the things I think I have always been able to do, and I think this is an ADHD quality, is no matter how many times I would do something and completely fuck up and feel like a failure, I would pick myself up, and I was maybe it's just the fact that I have really terrible memory, but I was always able to move on and start over, right? And so I'm there's that sense of just pick yourself up by the bootstraps over and over and over again that I always have done, where I'm that feels like a really nice quality to have, because now I don't have, I make mistakes all the time. I fuck up all the time, but I'm now I look at that as information. I look at that as research. I'm this is all kind of helping me move forward, as opposed to how I used to look at it, which was, oh, here's more evidence of what a terrible human I am. And now I'm kind of it is what it is, right? I've learned something. What can I learn from this experience? And it's, I feel like that makes it so much less painful to fail over and over and over again.
100%. Because the point is as well, right, is when we discover that we have this thing that's been staring us in the face, it's been really obvious all this time, is that we have to find ways to support ourselves, right? We have to accept that we have it and that there's no amount of effort. You cannot try it away. We cannot wish it away. It's always going to be there. So really, it's our responsibilities to best support ourselves and to have the best life that we can have with the relationships with people in our lives. In order to do that, we have to identify the ways in which we fall down, accept that those same things are going to trip us up tomorrow, and think of ways to best support ourselves to hopefully trip up less, or when we do, how we get over it, because this isn't going anywhere, and it's not going to be, it can't just be the first time every time, she says, knowing full well that every single month my period is a complete surprise. So why is the world ending? Oh no, I'm just bleeding. Okay, that's all right.
Every time. It's so true. Yeah. Oh my goodness. Well, I think it really. I do. Sometimes I feel like that video of the very like serious news anchor, or no, he was being interviewed by a news station, and his little daughter bursts into the room and like comes in behind him, and he's trying to stay all serious. I always think of that little girl every time. Where that's me bursting into every room, just being like, "All right, I'll think about this later." I feel like she could be an ADHD mascot for sure.
Oh, 100%.
Well, I'm so excited just to watch everything you're doing from afar, and I'm just congratulations on the last couple of years and just everything that is moving forward and on the impact you are having on the world and so many women. It's just phenomenal. So thank you, Laura, and thank you for sharing this time with me.
To you.
It is amazing.
Not at all. Thank you for having me. And you have to come on. You have to come on my podcast. We'll sort it out because I'd love to have you on. And we've got to stick together. We really have. Yeah. Community is everything.
Oh, I do. I know. And I really, I feel like the more of us, the better. And I don't know if it's an ADHD community thing or what, or if it's just people who are drawn to this line of work. I don't know, but I'm like, I can't believe how incredibly supportive this community has always been. I feel like just when I'm expecting somebody to be an asshole, they're always so wonderful. I
see my reputation has
I meant that generally. That's not true. I think there are probably a few people who I definitely would avoid in a crowded room, but never you. But I was going to ask you what's the most ADHD thing you've done this week, but you already answered that. So, would you? I know. No, I love that.
I mean, I've got more. I've got
to say, there's still many hours in today, so we'll stay tuned. But if I do like to ask if have you ever heard another name for ADHD that you liked, or is there anything that you would call it if you could rename ADHD?
Oh, that's such a good question. It's such a good question, and my mind has gone blank, but I love this because I actually did this with RSD.
Yes!
So rejection sensitive dysphoria plagues my life. It plagues my life. And especially when Dawn left and I did have to stand at the helm on my own, I was so worried. The RSD was off the scale, nearly to the point of not doing it, but I knew I had to do it. And so I was like, right, let me try and reframe this. What can I call it? And I started saying all these different words. And then it just came to me that they're just really shit daydreams. And that's it. That's all it is. It's really shit daydreams. And and it has helped me so much because when I think about it and I think, oh, well, this is going to be terrible and this is going to happen and da-da-da. And I'm like, and I can feel it. Don't get me wrong. It's not gone. But I can identify it and I say, well, it hasn't happened. So that really is just a really shit daydream. So yeah, that's what
I referenced that the other day. I've started using your really shit daydreams as an alternate explanation for RSD. I think it's great. And honestly, now that I think about it, just adding AF to the end of ADHD is pretty baller. I mean, that's that's a great way to rename it.
But guess what happened?
Did the charity accept
it? What happened the other day? So
or did they accept that as the name?
I don't know yet. We'll see. We don't know. We don't know yet. But I was obviously it was called ADHD as females so that we could say AF. But it is as females because it was our experience as females that we were sharing. Anyway, I was on BBC Radio Oxford the other morning and it was live. And I'm waiting to go in, and I think what must have happened is that the penny dropped for them at the last minute. I'm just about to go on air, live on air on the BBC, and this woman goes, Laura, I just want to say, as much as I appreciate that your name is ADHD as please do not swear, you're on the BBC. And then I was live, and I was literally like that. I felt like I'd just been told off like a kid at school, and I was just like, hello, suddenly talking in this really like posh grown up, trying to talk in a deep voice to not get in trouble. It was the most ridiculous thing. So yeah, AF have to wind it in a bit, but here we are.
No, I love it. Because it's almost like, it is kind of like, you know, you're just giving the middle finger, or I guess it's two fingers in. But it is a bit of like, yeah, you know what?
Yes, the thing is, I think it is exactly that. And also, just when I got diagnosed, and the poor psychiatrist was like, I took a breath, and I didn't come up for air for an hour, literally. And then this happened, and then this happened. Blah, 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 blah. And I'm sitting there, and my feet are tapping, and my fingers are bleeding. And she just went, you absolutely have severe combined type ADHD, and it impacts every aspect of your life from when you were a child. So it's like, she just literally went, and you are ADHD as fuck. Yes.
Oh gosh, I love it. I love it. I think it's the perfect name. And yeah. Well, this has been so lovely. Thank you, Laura. I'm so glad we got to do this. And yeah, I feel like
I'm so grateful. It's lovely to meet you.
Lovely to meet you too. And hopefully, you know, I look forward to watching everything that's going to happen for you and for your charity and the community you've built. So congrats and thank you.
Thank you so much.